Hi, my name is Sandra, host of Boss Lady Live, where I come to you every Monday night with experts to discuss issues of crime and violence, love and relationships, health and wellness, various different topics that affect us right here in Jamaica. Please like and share and subscribe. Click on the notification bell to be advised when you're on. See you then. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to Boss Lady Live. Once again, it is our pleasure to have you join us this evening. Like every other evening, we have an expert in his field. We have Reverend Norbert Stevens tonight, and we are discussing what is the role of the church in 2021. Now, why did I want to have this conversation? I wanted to have this conversation because I know certainly when I was growing up, I had to go to church. I didn't have a choice. We were in the mornings. Your mother woke you up. You're going to church. When in the evening, 4 o'clock, you're going to Sunday school. I don't know how much of that is happening now. The law and I should say the lack of law and order that's happening now. The breakdown in society, crime and violence, all the different things. I mean, parents wanting the children to be their friends, so there's not much law and order at home either. I mean, I just want to know, what is the church? What is the role of the church? I mean, are people still going to church? Are young people still going to church? Are they involved? Do they want to go to church? Is the church engaging and winning the young people? Tonight, I just want to say welcome to Reverend Norbert Stevens. Good night, Rev.
Night, Sandra. Welcome to your listeners as well, or your viewers.
Right. So tonight, let me just give you a little brief snapshot of who we have tonight. Reverend Norbert D. Stevens, prior to his entering ministry, Reverend Norbert Donovan Stevens worked in the personnel office of the Ministry of Agriculture for 4 years, 1981 to 85. He received his theological education at the United Theological College of the West Indies and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in theology, a diploma in ministerial studies in 1988, and he holds an MBA from the University of the West Indies Mona School of Business 2016. He was ordained to the ministry of the Word and Sacraments in 1989 within the United Church in Jamaica and Cayman Islands. So it's a long time you're at this, Rev.
Long time, over 30 years.
Long time. Right. So let us just, well, we have 5 people, and I don't see anybody telling me good night yet, but we have 5 people on so far. But I want to encourage my viewers tonight to ask. I am trying. You know I like to talk, right? So I'm trying to reduce the time that we spend live to 1 hour, as close to 1 hour as possible. So I'm asking my viewers tonight, please ask your questions as quickly as possible. Don't wait until we're almost ending, then you start asking the questions. So let's tell us a little bit, Rev, what is church like these days? What is the church doing? Crime and violence. To me, the church seems silent, bad.
Well, I'm not so sure that the church is silent. I just think that the church is in a different space. Mm-hmm. The COVID-19 pandemic has really challenged and stretched the church. But I don't think that the role of the church has changed, and really hasn't changed since its inception. If you go back to biblical scriptures, and maybe I should start from another perspective. Churches are driven by different things, and we're seeing in this era those manifestations. Some churches are driven by forces, so they are driven by their traditions or their practices or their conventions. Some churches are driven by personalities. So if you're not a sage on a stage, nobody can come and look at you or listen
And
to
if
you.
there's a mega church,
Oh, I tell you, some churches are driven by the resource
money,
base. Some
yes,
churches are driven by programs, and some churches are driven by evangelism. That, it is how you bring and reach people for God. But
yes,
fundamentally, the church, as we understand it from the perspective of my own faith tradition, is driven by purpose. And why is it that we say that? Because, you see, purpose is what allows people to have an understanding of how you build morale. If there's a purpose, you have a purpose for your show. Your show is
yes,
to help people to be informed about the critical things in life, and you want people to have that understanding. If the church is driven by purpose, then you have that morale building. If you have purpose, then it reduces frustration. If you have purpose, then you have a clear focus in terms of what you want to do. If there's focus, then there is cooperation because I know why I'm doing this. And if
right,
there's purpose, then there's opportunity for evaluation. So it can't just be doing church, it has to be being church. And I feel that the church has always been church, just in different ways. Sorry for my phone. So that if you go back to scriptures, there are two passages that outline the purpose of the church. And the first is Matthew 22 from verse 37 through to 46, which speaks about the great commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. That text offers two purposes of the church. One is to worship God, that we are to
yes,
love God with all our hearts. So that's the basis of worship, that we want to be in a relationship with God. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself, which means that you ought to have a ministry of outreach, that you are wanting your neighbor to be in the same position or better as you are. That's what
right.
it means to love your neighbor as yourself. We're not so good on that right now.
Ah,
Um, but essentially, that's the purpose of the church. And then if you go to the second scripture, which is Matthew 18:19 to 20, where Jesus says, go into the world and make disciples. So the third purpose of the church is to evangelize, that we are to go into the world and create carbon copies of ourselves, if you like. But that part of it is to baptize them in the name of Jesus and so on, which means that we must have fellowship. And then, of course, part of all of the evangelism and the fellowship is the nurture, which is the discipleship making. So there are five purposes of the church. One is to worship. Second is to really be engaged in outreach and advocacy. Third is to evangelize. Fourth is to have fellowship. And fifth is to make disciples. Now, I could argue that the church has never stopped doing that. What I think is critical in an age like this is, well, what are our needs? And we're discovering in this COVID phase that you have three manifestations of church. If you take worship, for instance, there is a gathered church, which we can't do now because the government has says you can't meet unless you're streaming. There is the online church, a digital church, where you are streaming services. And then there's a scattered church where you're not going anywhere at all. Now, the issue for the church, as you have raised, is how do we meet needs? So you spoke about young people. They are in a digital age. There's no need for physically come nowhere. I can sit in my living room, as I have done for the past couple of months when I'm not preaching, because I'm not allowed in a space based on numbers, and I can go to a worship service. I can have communion. I can share in that space without leaving my house. Now, if I'm in the millennial group or the Generation Z, as you call them, why do I get out of them bed and jump in them car and drive 10 miles or 5 miles when they can sit in their bed with their device and be church? And some people have an issue with that because they say you're watching church, you're not being church. But again,
But but
it's
but but then church rev is about the fellowship. A lot of people, that's their only means of socializing, especially older folks.
right.
And there's a whole confusion also, because you are just talking from your what, Anglican,
No,
your
we're Reformed, the United Churches, Presbyterian, Congregationalists, and Disciples of Christ.
but you have so many. I mean, it's confusing. You have
Right.
so you have non-denominational, you have the mega church, you have your type of church, you have Methodist, you have Anglican, you have Catholic. I mean, it's confusing. It's
Yeah, but what?
confusing to me,
Right.
let alone the youngsters.
Well,
So
again,
where do
it's this is how we
God.
define church, because I think what
Yes.
is common among all of them are people's needs. So some people have a need for fellowship, some people have a need for worship, some people have a need for advocacy, some people have a need for accompaniment. I think that
Right.
any church that is worth its salt has to ask itself, well, if I am in a particular location, what are the socioeconomic and other issues within that space? And the people who come to that space, what are their needs, so that I can configure my ministry and my witness around those? I think what is happening to many of us, especially in this COVID time, regardless of which denomination we belong to, is that there seemingly is an appetite to safeguard what we've always had. And we don't want to give it up for nothing. But
Mm-hmm.
COVID is forcing us to do a lot of things differently. When COVID started, I could count on my one hand how many churches streamed. No, everybody has streamed, and everybody
Right.
finding creative ways of worshiping. So I think part of the confusion is when people place an emphasis on their own manifestation of church. And when, as well, unfortunately, they insist that only their manifestation of church is the true church. When,
Like, like you have Jehovah Witness who you
right,
can visit their church, but they're not visiting your church.
that's the point. And my argument is that if you put all of us together, we find a church. We
Right.
find the emphasis on the baptism, or on the rituals, or on the preaching, or on the
And
witnessing, or all those
most of
things.
us end up in churches that our parents really go to until we
Right.
get older, like me, who after I get to a certain age, and I wasn't so. I mean, I'm still Methodist by
Right.
baptism, but I wasn't feeling engaged.
So your needs weren't
So
being
I
met.
kept searching. My needs weren't being met.
So
Fuck.
that to me is the heart of the conversation.
Right.
How is my church meeting my needs? So I give you an example with this digital space. What is required now of a church that is really worth its salt is to ask itself, well, how many people only want to hear a sermon? How do you package that? And it sounds like you're doing business, but really that's really what it is if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
How many people need the fellowship? As you say, the older people, they miss that, because loneliness is the worst illness in life, you know.
Trust me,
You can't,
loneliness is not a good thing at all.
it's a worst thing in life when you have nobody to talk to, nobody to respond to you, nobody to care for you, nobody to visit you. And many of our members who are in the 60s and up, church is their space. So they miss
Right.
it terribly. But
Some
that's
people
what
own a bench.
exactly. And in our tradition, you used to own the bench and nobody could sit on
Or
it.
else that's a crime.
You had to pay for it. And I used to say to my congregation when I was a pastor, listen, I have no receipt in my office of anybody who pay for any seat, so anybody can sit down anywhere. So that if we are talking about needs meeting, what are the needs of the people in the spaces where we have church? And I think part of what is challenging the church in 2021 is how we get back to some of those basic things and to ask some of those questions.
Yes.
COVID has said you can have a 1 hour service where we used to have 3 hours. COVID has said you can have a service with 15 people but still reach 5,000 when it used to be only 10 coming to your church. So that
Right.
in the crisis are some opportunities to look at ourselves and to ask ourselves, whose needs are we meeting? You show me a church that is meeting needs, and I will show you a thriving church.
Right. So there's another issue that I've been seeing in recent times. The parents, some parents, let me say some, because when we speak, we're not speaking for everybody, we're speaking generally.
Okay.
I can only speak from my point of view because this is what I see. In the morning, they get up to go to church. If they do go to church, these are the parents now. If the kids don't want to go, they just say I don't want to go, and that's it. So where are we going to end up? Because this is what I'm hearing bantering out there. Church is there for control. It's an institution that was put together to keep the masses controlled, and a lot of persons are choosing or opting not to have a religion. We speak more of spirituality more than religion. So it's becoming very
secular.
Yes.
And that is really what is happening, that we have moved to the age of secularism, which which says that I am free to do what I want to do. I'm free to think how I want to think, and I'm free to behave how I feel like I want to behave. And that's the challenge of the church in a space like this, because when we were growing up, our socialization was school and church, and to a
Right.
lesser extent, community, and maybe even to a greater extent. Those are the three agents of socialization. No, you got the internet. You don't need church or school or anybody to socialize you. And our children live on in that space. How many of your listeners, for instance, or viewers, text their children in their bedroom in their own house when they want to talk to them?
Exactly. That happens. That is the
It's
norm.
commonplace, right? But it wasn't the norm. There was no way growing up that I could be in that situation where I was texting my father. I'd have to be in his physical space. My
And
mother to a
there's
lesser
no
extent.
Sunday morning or Sunday evening that you weren't found at the dining table.
You didn't
That
have
don't happen.
choice.
No, the dining table is a piece of furniture for most households. Nobody don't
Agreed.
really have dinner around the table anymore. Everybody grab a plate, go in the bedroom or
Mm.
whichever particular room in the household that they like, and they're on their phone or laptop or what tablet or whatever, and everybody's having their own thing. So
So
where
it's
are we going?
different. Well, part of it is again how human beings adapt, because we do, and each generation attempts to make their own situation, their own circle, their families, or the structure a little easier. We are less harsh on our children than our parents were on us. My father ruled by fear. That's how
Right.
he grew
My
us
mother
up.
too.
Right. I just departed from that because I didn't want my children to fear me, so that they had more latitude than I had, because I felt that what we had was too strict. But children thrive on desire to have order and to have someone really having authority over them. It's just that we feel that if we win them over, that we will bring them over. But I will
Yes.
still argue, and I go back to my first premise, that even if you were to force people to go to church, if when they go to that space, their needs aren't met, then it's an uncomfortable and unlikely place for them to remain. So that when you think of this time, for instance, we're not allowing even children to go out of the house. They're online in school. They're not allowed in the space of church because, again, because of the regulations and so on. And part of what we're saying in our own denomination is what then becomes of the ministry to children and young people. That we have to sit down again and ask ourselves, how do we reorganize that space? That space is very difficult because they will tell you as young people, we're tired of the Zoom. We do that for the whole week. We don't want to do it in church. So that
Right.
what it means, if we're worried about what is happening in terms of our maybe social and moral fabric, is how we begin to have conversations with those that we really want to take along with us, rather than thinking that we have a prescription for them, that if we just do what we've always done, they will come along. You and I didn't have any choice. Our
No.
children now have choice.
Right.
Whereas if I told my parents I'm not going to church, I get a knock over my head and
No,
I still go.
you think about that because that wasn't an option.
It was an option. No, you can't
No.
knock the child over the head. They will call the police on you and say that's it's child abuse. Granted, they wouldn't do that, but it's a different space. But you still have to engage the children and young people and the young adults. So that what then is a minister of the church to children and young people? It can't be that you come to our space and we will fill your minds with what we think you need, and you go back out and be nice little carbon copies. When I went to a camp, I'll give you an example. What they call it was a children's camp, but these were
Yes.
youngsters, boys, that I was in a group with between, say, 9 and 11. And they could share stories about apps that are on Play Store or the Google Store or the App Store, the Apple Store, that allow them to have sex with their daughters or their mothers and their sisters and so on. And these were 9-year-old boys. Me never know nothing about that. But they knew because all of them have a smartphone. So when
Right.
we were growing up, when your parents told you to go to your room, they were sending you to a space that had a bed, a dresser, and maybe a table.
That was punishment.
That was punishment because there was nothing else in there. Now, your child's room, not everybody, because there are different social classes. Even if they go in with a phone, they don't want to come out because the phone is their entertainment, their connection with their friends, and it is a place where they can research, so that you find that a child now goes home and doesn't leave the house again until the next morning.
Right. As
So
a matter of fact, they go straight to their room.
they go straight to their room. So
Right.
again, it comes back to the issue of how do we build values for children and young people, and even anybody, in a space that is indisciplined, because that's a struggle with Jamaica. Look at what has happened with this vaccine and its rollout, and what has happened with people jumping the line and that kind of stuff. That's our culture, unfortunately. How then do you tell a child, line up and wait? How then do you tell any young people that, if you don't know somebody, you will get through? How do you tell anybody if you work hard, you'll be rewarded? When what they see around us contradicts almost everything that we're trying to say to them. So they look at the church and they say, oh, you can go and talk because you don't pat already. You have your degree, and you have your house, and you have your car. Why you harass me who are hustle out there? Or if I cut some corners or whatever it is.
Right.
Those are the issues we wrestle with. And unless we as church begin to ask us, maybe I tell you this, Sandra, and maybe it will sound strange. I'm kind of glad that the church doors closed. Why? Because now we can focus on some of the things that we need to focus on that are outside the walls of the sanctuary. The people, as
Right.
you say, who don't have food to put on their table, those who work in the tourism sector, that is now almost shuttered and will be shuttered for at least another year and a half. How them live? Those who work in industries that are not, stable and firm, who are on furlough or have reduced salaries, how them provide for them family? Those who
Yes.
live in communities, as you see all the time around, where the girls are victimized and raped and so on, who advocates for them? How that's the work of the church. The outreach, loving your neighbor as you love yourself, means that I'm as concerned about my neighbor's welfare as I'm concerned about mine. But right now we're kind of isolated. You can live beside your neighbor and don't even know what them look like, because we're not going to cross the fence no more.
Nope.
So I'm saying that the doors of the closed church, the doors of the church closing, opens an avenue, if you like, for the church to go back into the community. There's a church, I won't call the name, downtown. You know how they worship? They go on a Sunday afternoon or whichever day. They spend half an hour in a garage, and the rest of the time is spent walking the community. If there's a
Yes.
wedding, it's in somebody's yard. If there's a baptism, it is in somebody's yard. If it is a preachment, it is in somebody's yard. You are connecting with the people where they are. Isn't that what Jesus did? Jesus never started church, he started a movement. Or we turn it into church. And we have institutionalized it in such a way that we feel that without the institution, it is no longer church. And I'm
Without
arguing that
walls.
it's not the church is
Without
not the
walls.
wall or the benches or the people. It's the people in it. I am the church. You are the church. We are the best representation of God that God desires. And if I don't live a life that is an exemplary life for someone else, then I am not being faithful to my faith. So we
So,
need to
so,
go up more.
all right. So, being a Christian, in a nutshell, what is being a Christian? What is serving God as in the framework in 2021?
I think it is obviously having a faith base that you have a resource that you call upon to guide your life. And by
Which is
faith,
the
I mean
Bible.
belief in God, but also belief in the values of God, the kingdom values, as you say, that you must love your neighbor, you must be kind and generous and have integrity and all those kind of stuff. That's the core of your faith. But it also means being an example of what it means to live in community, how you then connect with people. I can't be a Christian and not be concerned about you. I can't be a
Right.
Christian and want to malign you. I can't be a Christian and want to undermine you. So that to me it is the concept and the principle and the symbol of the cross. There's a vertical relationship with God. I'm in connection with God, and there's a horizontal relationship with those who are around me. So I can't have a relationship with God and not have one with my neighbors, because then the cross is not complete. So being a Christian is much harder now than it was maybe in times before, because Christian
The
faith and
distractions.
yeah, people make choices. So now people tell you that they're agnostic, or they don't believe, they don't have any belief, or even in terms of people understanding themselves, they're neither male nor female. They say that they're you know you have
Gender
different
fluid.
ways.
Gender
Yeah,
fluid.
right. You have different challenges that will say to you, well, Why is it that you believe that? So that I always say that your faith is reduced to two words. I believe. This is what I believe. I can't force you to believe it, but this is what I believe. And because I believe it, I live it. What I think is a gap, and maybe I'm wrong with this. What I think is a gap is that there is sometimes a gap between the profession and the practice. So I'm a Christian, but then how do I drive? Do I drive like a Christian? I'm a Christian. How do I relate to somebody who gets me upset in the store? I'm a Christian. How do I relate to my coworkers who I can't take? I'm a Christian. How do I relate to the people in the community who, because I seem to be a particular type of person, picks on me? The proof of it in a 21st century is being, not doing. It is being. So I can go to church, I can dress right, I can speak right. I'm doing the things, but I'm not being a person of faith who connects with God and connects with others. You show me a Christian, and I show you a person who has inner peace because they have this connection with God. The Bible says that you then have a peace that passes all understanding. They have relationships with others where they may not be friends, but they're respected. They are, when you talk about service, and it's not just service in the physical space called the church, it's how they serve their community. You are serving by the role you play in the advocacy role that you take on. That is service. Now you do it, if you do it because you want a better community, you want a better set of men, that's service. Service is not restricted to the institution called the church. How do I serve my community? How do I serve my nation? I lift my hat to those who volunteer to do many different things, because that is also service. So to me, that's what it means to be a Christian, that there is this connection with God, but there needs to be some connection with others. You can't be in a silo. There's no Christian who operates or lives in a bubble. You have to live within the context of community. And Jesus says that we're to be salt and light, which means that we're to impact those who are around me. I need to make replicas of my Christian faith by the way I live, by the way I worship, by the way I witness, by the way I evangelize, by the way I fellowship, that people should see me and see as close as possible a resemblance of what God should look like in a human being.
I'm in total agreement with that, Rev. Now, a lot of persons, because, I tend to talk about religion and spirituality a lot. Mm-hmm. And so when you speak to persons, you ask them about church and why they don't go to church, they will say to you that they find that people of the church, although they speak about non-judgment, they are one of the most judgmental people. That's the view. I'm just saying what the view is.
Right.
They are very judgmental. They are quick to cast aspersions if you slip and buck your toe. Mm-hmm. And so persons are not being attracted to the church because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be, here today, gone tomorrow kind of thing. So there's no loyalty. There's no, that thing called brotherhood and sisterhood that I take very seriously. They see it as being very fickle in nowadays days, because it's nowadays days is what's in, what's happening, what's a general consensus. There's very little, okay, this is what Christianity is, this is what we're supposed to do, and let us lead by example.
Right. Well, I go back to what I said earlier, that Jesus started a movement, not a church. And by a movement, I mean, his one sermon Jesus preached for the whole of his life, the kingdom of God is like this. You go back to the whole New Testament, he kept saying that. The kingdom of God is like how you look after your neighbor, how you love, that kind of stuff. What has happened, unfortunately, is that the institution we call the church has taken over what the church movement ought to be. And what do I mean by that? How you get in, how you stay in, and how you ensure that people either stay in or stay out, take sometimes precedence over how you relate. Because what people are searching for is a relationship.
Absolutely.
I'm not wanting someone to judge me because you don't know my story. You can't just look at me and make a judgment about me. You have to get to know me. But the truth is, I mean, if you do anything with group dynamics, and that's why it's been church so hard, they argue that in the church, you have groups of seven families or seven sets of people who come together. And when a new person comes into the church, they can't get into one of those groups unless somebody leaves that group. So
Right.
that it's hard, the clique. So it's hard to be integrated into a space. So that you get people come, and Reverend Oliver Daly, my good friend, say that they come through the front door and they walk through the back door. Because when they come, they can't find somewhere that they can locate as their own. They don't feel accepted or affirmed. So that the churches that are smart enough will ensure that when you come in, you're a part of a group, so that you never lose those things. So that it's not rocket science, it's human behavior. But beyond that, it's an institution called the church. And what I find most disturbing sometimes is that the people who pass judgment, and harshly so, were the ones who experience judgment themselves and feel that this is just the right thing.
Hurt people.
It's a hurt people. And that's why I say that, you show me a thriving church and I show you a church that has relationships. To me, it is not about whether you come on a Sunday or a Saturday, or you wear a hat or you don't wear a hat, or you speak in tongues or you don't speak in tongues. It's the nature of the relationship you share with those who come. Because if I come and you don't have no interest in me, then what is the point of my coming? Because again, it comes back to the issue of my spiritual needs, my emotional needs, my financial needs, my need for nurture, all of those needs. So that I think that is part of it. The institution has taken over the movement, and until it rediscovers what a movement is, it will continue to lose people.
Okay, Mr. Henry. Hi, Mr. Henry. Hi, Masha Ann. Welcome. I knew you guys would have been here because I know you're talking your topic. David says, I think that the man-made doctrines that are not Bible-based, which are imposed on people, makes the Christian life onerous. I don't know what man-made doctrines he's really talking
Yes, I think that David would need to clarify some of that.
You may need to expound on that.
Or maybe he's speaking about man-made practices, because sometimes in terms of the Bible, and I know that people have gone different ways in terms of biblical doctrines, I think that the fundamental principle of the Bible is that it is a revelation of God's relationship with human beings. That's really, if you summarize it in one sentence, it is how God relates to human beings. And that relationship is always one grounded in love, in forgiveness, in helping that person to become the best that they can become. That's why the Bible says that we're made in the image of God. So that I think any doctrine that is not meant to get the best out of you is not a doctrine that is consistent with the Bible. So you can always test the doctrines. I think that you can always go back and determine. The problem you have is that people interpret the Bible, so that the interpretation that some people have, the way they want it. And again, it's the issue of control. And maybe that's what David is alluding to, that in some instances, possibly in almost all churches, what they don't want to lose, which is why you have the institution, is the control. So you take this issue now of the digital church. Just give an example. On a Sunday morning, whereas you're a Methodist, I don't know which church you used to go. If it was Coke Methodist, you go down to Coke. Or Sackstop, right. You go down to Sackstop. Sunday morning, don't you have about 200 options now?
Well, I don't go to Sackstop anymore.
And well, whatever. Even if you just pick a church that you go to, wherever you go to, you don't have 200 options. So if I'm the pastor, my fear now is, how do I retain my members?
Yes.
On a platform that is now so much broader. So you've heard pastors now saying, if you take the vaccine, you're not a member of the church and I'm going to read you out. On what basis do you tell anybody that?
Right. That's not your business to do.
That can't even be biblical in my judgment, and maybe I'm wrong. Right. But somebody has to show me in the Bible where that becomes a doctrine. But it is control. So that if we feel that if we lose control, we lose people. But you go back to Genesis. What is it that Jesus did, or God did in the beginning? You know, the greatest gift God gave us is that thing called free will.
Yes.
Nobody creates anything that they don't have control over, or ultimate control over. God created us and says, I'm going to give you free will in the hope that you will be aligned to me and you will commit to me for life. Human beings have taken the free will and said, God, you can go about your business. I'm going to do anything I want to do. That's part of, but it's a tremendous gift because nobody else creates anything and gives it free will. And we have taken free will and abused it. But that's a gift that God has given to us so that we can make the choice between good and evil, between God and other beings and that kind of stuff. So to me, if we teach people the right things, then we don't have to
Right.
control them. You don't have to control people if they understand it. And you have traveled the world, I'm sure. You go to the UK and you're taking a train and everybody line up. And if there's a set of newspaper, there's a stand and there's nobody guarding the stand and people put the money in the liquor bucket and take up them paper and go on. If they're driving and somebody is wanting to pass, they wiggle the light and you go. That's discipline. You don't have to have a policeman in every corner to get that done. What happens in Jamaica? And we argue that if the British were here, it would be different. In Jamaica now, you go try that. You put a basket with newspaper out there and thief the basket on the table and the newspaper as well. So
Yeah,
to me,
but when did we get there?
because again, I think that we feel that it is by osmosis, and it isn't. I mean, it is. There has to be an understanding that, listen, there are some rules by which we must live, and they're in the best interest of the whole community. But there's another piece to it, Sandra, that we have to admit, and I don't think we've gotten it right. It is the level to which people are educated and the level to which people can reason and think in ways that are healthy and helpful. The church started that when it started schools, and we still have quite a number of schools where we were trying to indoctrinate people. It hasn't quite been as successful as we'd want it to be, but that's part of what was attempted.
I was speaking last week to Dennis Brooks.
Right.
He is the communication strategist at JCF.
Right.
And I was saying to him about, the whole crime situation.
Right.
He was saying that he doesn't believe that crime is caused because, we blame it on lack of education,
Right.
we blame it on parenting, we blame it on guns, we blame it on a whole heap of different things. And he told us that in Jamaica, every day from Monday to Friday, because I don't think it's on Saturdays and Sundays because we don't have that problem, 200 to 240 policemen are placed at working stoplights because of indiscipline.
Right.
Working stoplights. And it's those same people, you send them to foreign.
They obey.
Whether the Caribbean or otherwise, they obey. So it's something.
But there's another layer though. But there's another layer though, Sandra. And it is,
we can't blame it on crime, on guns and on education, and because what about Haiti? Haiti don't have the level of crime that we have.
No, they don't.
And what happened to their education? What happened to poverty? What happened to poverty in Haiti?
Right.
I mean,
I think it's a combination of factors. We are an aggressive set of people. We've always been, but also, as you would know, our systems don't quite work as they should. The justice system doesn't work as it should.
Doesn't work, or there's a lack of will for it to work.
Well, it could be both. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, so I wouldn't go into that to say that I would, categorically say anything. But I do know, for instance, how in a small country like Jamaica, nobody can find you. You tell me how is that possible?
Right.
How can you hide in Jamaica? How can you amass 300 traffic tickets and nobody don't know who you are?
Had the same conversation last week.
How is it that you can purchase a birth certificate that says that you're born tomorrow and it is authentically stamped? How is it that you can do any of those things unless there's collusion at a number of levels? And so until that changes, you're going to always have people who feel, what is the point of going the straight and narrow if I can do, take the vaccine thing. If you know somebody, you can get the vaccine tomorrow. And I say that without water in my mouth, because that's the nature of the Jamaican society. And we sometimes take pride in it, and sometimes it shames us, because I think that we are a good set of people. We're probably the most hospitable set of people I know in the whole world.
Right.
We are. So there's some really good things about us. And we can behave, because I've been to other parts of the world, just like so many others, where as Jamaicans we behave. But then it's just like almost something snaps into place when we come a yard. So, I probably shouldn't say this, but I've had the privilege of, really traveling the world, based on some activities that I was engaged in. And the most difficult flight I used to have is the one from Gatwick to Kingston. Why? Because not just the people on the plane who were the stewardess treated us differently, but we behave differently. So I'm in the UK for a week or two, and I, like you, everybody line up for going to the bus, everybody do all the
Right.
kind of stuff, and them jump on this plane, and them want to carry 10 bags when you're only supposed to carry 3. And them sitting around the back, and them a drink for the whole flight. And as soon as them come, the eyelashes are out here, the hair, and you come out, and you have to have a posture, that you have made it in life. Now, I'm not being disrespectful to a soul. I don't want people to take it the wrong way. But there's a sense in that what I can get away with in Jamaica, I can't get away with anywhere else. So I can just do anything I want. That is part of the issue. And one of the big mistakes we've made,
From somewhere in the rep.
hmm,
It's coming from somewhere.
it
I don't
comes
think
from somewhere.
know where it's coming from, but it's coming from somewhere. Because I can remember, I still remember when I was about 10, 11, my mother found a half pencil, not a whole pencil, a half pencil in my bag. And she said to me, I would say I was in primary school. And she said to me, where you get it from? And I said, my friend gave me. She said, your friend working? Your friend working? No, you take it back. And that lesson, that one lesson, and I remember it today, right? That one lesson told me that other people things don't belong to me. So I can't thief. I can't thief, and I can't want other people things. Just that you satisfied with what I give you. So to me, everything stems from parenting. And
It
this
does too, but
going to church which offered me a structure.
mhm.
So people may say it's a good thing or a bad thing, but to me it's more good than bad, because it really does offer you a structure. And the lessons that are taught there are not bad lessons.
They're not,
So
and
may
and that's why probably why the church now needs to find itself in some other spaces. And that's why I say that it's a good thing that the walls are no longer where we gather for the time being. That how then do we as a church, and we are saying that to our own church, get into the headspace of our children and young people where they are, whether they're at home on their tablets, or whether they're in a classroom virtually or physically, or whether they're in a community. That's the task now of the socialization that we need to have to teach some values that are still principled, but are shaped a little differently from when we were growing up. I remember when I was a little boy going to prep school. My parents, I was probably the only one in the family of 4. No, 2 of us went to prep school. The others went to primary school. We came from a poor family, and it was a privilege to go to prep school. But I couldn't ask my parents for certain things because I knew they couldn't afford it. And one day I went into a little toy store and stole a car. But me did know, so me could have never met them see the car. So I played with the car under the bed at night with a flashlight. Now the car was one of them little station wagons. So, and I was deathly afraid of dead people because I went to a Catholic school, and I would just be fearful of the funerals especially with the hearse. The car reminded me of a hearse. So I threw it away. But the principle was I could not let my parents know that I stole, so that nobody never have to tell me that it was wrong. But you now have the influence of other cultures. You have the influence of, just as I've said, a secular society which says I'm free to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, and how I want to do it, and you can't tell me what to do. So it becomes a much more difficult space for people to be socialized in a particular way. Because even in these other countries, you're seeing the changes as well, where people now are just simply just being very secularized, and are just living how they want to live, And so enforcement becomes a really difficult challenge. You look at what has happened with the various movements. So it is single issues that people are about now, not a broad-based culture of respect and discipline and so on. It is my sexuality, it is my gender, it is my right to look how I want to look, it is my right to tattoo myself. It is all of those issues. And you can't say to people it is, well, I suppose some people have brave enough to say it's wrong, but then how do you engage those people to see where they're coming from, to see what is a window that I must now use to connect with these people with what I have? So I would argue that the church is on the periphery. We're not in the center no more. In the early 1900s and so on, we were in the center of the society, the community. It was the agent of socialization, the agent of education, the agent of morals and values. We are now on the edge of the paper, if we're on the paper at all. And people are now wanting to say to us, before I even believe you.
Honest statement.
But it is true.
Their hard statement was honest.
If people are now saying, I mean, how do people come to faith now? They don't come to faith because I preach a sermon. They come to faith by testing the various things out there to see, well, what is real and what is not real. So that, again, I want to say it because I say it a million times. The real litmus test is the model of Jesus. What did Jesus do? He had a relationship with people. Him sit down with them, the woman who at the well, this prostitute who nobody would go to, him go sit down beside her. He broke every kind of rule you could think of to be with people, because for him, it is a relationship you share with people that will define what you believe and who you are and how you live.
Mr. Henry is asking, isn't too much freedom dangerous?
Yeah, but you see, freedom doesn't mean that you do anything you want, you know. Freedom means that you're guided by a set of principles. What I mean by freedom in relation to the church is that, I mean, a pastor shouldn't be the one to tell me when to comb my hair or when to put my clothes on or how to give my money. Yes, the Bible says that you must give a tenth, but I mean, some people with their tithe and they give some to the church and they give some to some other needy people and so on. I think you're giving back. So that, right. I think that you can't be so the freedom for me is not freedom to do anything. My freedom is that I have the choice to follow God. And by following God, I'm following the kingdom principles. So the kingdom principles, you talk about them at Advent and so on, the love, joy, peace, hope, all those kind of stuff. I'm following some principles, but within that, I have the space to be myself. What I think that people like to do is to say, well, I need to control you. So you shouldn't have any space to do anything you want to do. If you don't do it by my way, something is wrong with you. So I don't think it is freedom as free for all. So you take the issue of the great debate we're having about abortion. And, you know, the church is caught in the middle of it. Should we be pro-choice, pro-life? Some people are very clear that it is pro-life and not pro-choice. And you have strong advocates on either side. The question is, I mean, if you as a person come to me as a pastor and you're wrestling with this thing, do I just simply say to you, this is how I know it, and I don't even hear your story or even understand where you're coming from? I think that for me, the starting point is the place of listening. And it is a place of understanding where people are at before you make a judgment on what it is that they do or don't do. I think ethical choices are always made with a degree of uncertainty. So if a person comes to me with a particular issue, I need to listen first before I pass judgment on them. And I think that sometimes, I mean, it might sound strange coming from a pastor, but I think sometimes that's what's wrong with the church. That we start from a place of judgment to say, well, Sandra, you're here, and that hair can't come at church. You need to cover it. Or that dress is whatever. You need to put on something else. And it's the controlling piece of that. And I'm not saying you must come in anything. We got a relationship. Right. Who is Sandra?
Service. What does she bring to the table?
That's the point.
You're hardwired on these particular
controlling elements, and that's why I say there's a distinction between the institution and the movement. And you think about it. If you go the Jesus way, Jesus went from place to place, helping people, walking with people, talking with people, understanding people. He never set up no monument and say, come and see where I'm at. And this is the be all and the end all. All churches, as far as I know, maybe, and even know, were established in communities. But you still find that the community gone, but the physical building's still there, and people don't even want to close it because this is where God is. But God is not in the building. God is in the lives of people. So you, as one of my good friends says, you come to church for a refill, and then you go into the world, and that refill now must come out of you in terms of the relationship you share with others. What is a real issue in terms of the morals and the values is that you just see some shades of gray in some of our lives and how we live, and therefore people just don't accept the offering that we offer. So I speak, but I don't live it. I've seen it a million times. You go to a church, big church, group of people in the church. Some people drive, some people take the bus, and the people who drive past the people who take the bus, and then they offer them a ride.
Yeah, they're not
But them
putting
go
them
to
in
the same church. Them go to the same church. And I'm not suggesting that it is as easy as I make it. It's not as easy as that. But it is those inconsistencies that sometimes make some people feel, well, what is the point of the church if you live near me but you won't offer me a ride? But we're in the same place. I worship God and I lift our arms and we're shouting and we're praising, and nothing wrong with that. But it's the same thing with Paul in Corinthians. You remember 1 Corinthians 12-14, where the people were talk about the greater gifts, the speaking in tongues, the prophecy, and the doing of the supernatural, the magic. And Paul says, if you can do all of them, something that you're not love, you're just an irritating instrument in my voice. And he says the greatest of these is love, hope, and faith, because he was arguing that those are things you can't see except for love. You can't see hope and faith, but you can see love. So if we demonstrate love, we offer people the gift of choice, but we offer them the gift of choice within a framework that seeks the best for them, because the love that God has for us is what is in our best interest. That's always agape love.
Right. One second. Nadine says it's about the relationship you have with Christ.
And the relationship you have with others as well.
Right.
You start there and you continue on.
And I'm not so in agreement with this statement, but Mr. Henry says, do people really fear God? Do they understand the wrath of God? Probably we need to share how God responds when we disrespect him. I'm not so sure about the wrath part, but let me hear your answer on this one.
Well, the truth is, I mean, the Bible has clear examples of God being upset with God's people. There are so many examples of it. Remember with Moses and the golden calf and so on, and God was just really upset with the people, and Moses became upset with the people as well. But there's always something redemptive about God. So whereas we offend God, I think that God's punishment is not meant to destroy us. So some people think of the wrath of God as something that's going to just zap you and you're going to burn up. But it is sometimes for us to be denied something so that we become better at what it is that God is calling us to do. So we lose some things. So if you take, for instance, the issue of you use a good example of the prodigal son. You remember that story? And the good son who never do nothing wrong, and the father who, I mean, everything about that story just seemed wrong up. Because the boy who behaved bad and take away the money and go spend it and righteous living and eat whatever and come back, and him get the ring, him get the robe, and him get the party. And the son will say, well, what is wrong with me? It says that the father was saying, son, you have me, you'll always have these things. This little boy lost his way and has found it. So I think sometimes we and maybe that is something that is a challenge in the church. I wouldn't say it's wrong with the church, but a challenge in the church, that we are so busy looking for the wrath of God that we don't find ways of helping people to come into the redemptive nature of God. So
absolutely.
So to me, I don't look for God to zap nobody. I say that we write our own stories. If you sow some seeds,
that's my view. That's why I said
you sow some seeds. You sow the seed of disrespect. Somebody is going to disrespect you. You sow the seed of discord, you will end up facing some discord yourself. So that there is a cause and effect way in which I think God operates. But God never ever does it to destroy us. That's why God loves us with an everlasting love. No, say the unpardonable sin is when, and the fear of God is not that you're afraid of God, but the fear of God is that you live in awe of God and you respect God so much that you don't want to cross God. That's the relationship we ought to have with God. But I feel that some people, and maybe I think where David is coming from, has taken it to the point where they say, well, since God and I have a relationship, I don't have to obey no rules. I can do anything I want. I can live any which way I want, and God will just be okay. I'm not buying that either. Because again, God's principles, as you find in the New Testament, are the kingdom values. This is how it is. This is how we ought to live. This is how we ought to relate. This is how we ought to worship. Those are the kingdom values. If you step outside of them, you are not consistent in your faith. And what is it that God looks for? Is a faithfulness. It is a consistency of being a Christian that God looks for. So the wrath of God to me is a reward for what it is that you have sowed. I don't always believe that it is meant to destroy, but it is meant to make us better. But I know that a lot of people won't agree with that.
What I want to add before I give a shoot to another statement from Mr. Henry. The millennials know. Everything they want to know, they Google it, right?
Right.
When they can't find something that is palpable that they can touch and they can feel,
right.
And we say it's God and God exists, but you can't really show them a person. How do you relate to the millennials by telling them that there is a God? Because a lot of the young people, if they can't touch it, taste it, feel it, it doesn't exist.
Right. Well, I mean, I start from the premise that you can't convince somebody about something against their will.
Right.
And I came across a definition of faith that I've never forgotten. And it goes like this. Faith is stepping out into a dark abyss, hoping that either God will catch you or he'll put something under your feet for you to stand. So I come back to what I said earlier. Faith is summarized by two words, I believe. So that what we would say to a millennial is, listen, I don't believe that we are here by choice or by chance. Well, not by choice, but not even by choice. We're not here by choice. We're not here by chance either. That this world, when you think of it, and you use the science, because people say that it is not scientific, when you think of how intricately this world has been created and how intricately human beings have been created, there must be a superior being that has done that. Now, that's what I believe. That's my faith, that being is God. And that I believe that the principles that I read in the Bible are principles that make for better living, for better community, for better people. So I believe in those principles. So that I make the connection between this God and these principles, and that's what I believe. And I offer you that. Now, you can choose to say you don't accept it or you accept it. That's your choice. I can't force you into doing it. I can't beat you or beat it into your head. Right. It is an experience and an encounter you have with God. It's a personal encounter you have with God. So that I think that that's where I start, that you're not trying to convince somebody about something that you can touch. You can't touch a toothache, but I mean, I know there's a classical case. You can't touch a toothache, you can feel it, or you know it. So you know that. But some people won't accept that either. But then some people believe in themselves. They believe in other people. They believe. So it's all about what you believe in. And my argument is, whatever you believe in should make you a better person. Should make your community better. Should make your world better. And for me, the Christian faith, all those boxes are checked. No, do all Christians live like that? No, but it still does not invalidate the belief I have.
To all people who claim to be Christian.
You should be the pastor.
Let us be who claim to be Christians.
And it's profession without practice.
Right.
Because you do have people who profess but don't practice.
All right. So Mr. Henry says the youth gravitate to churches that entertain. I dare say that engagement is not necessarily entertainment. The church sometimes tries to bring the youth into its gates, and in so doing, we sometimes forget the admonition, come out from among them and be ye separate.
Right.
Come out among them.
I think what you're saying is that, I mean, we should find a way to help young people to maintain the faith
Yes.
once we come into the church. But again, I go back to the digital space, that really and truly, it is hard for you now to minister to a culture that is rooted in Netflix,
Yes.
and all those things where you are entertained 24/7. When you were growing
TikTok,
up, and I'm not aging you, but
Facebook,
I think I did
Instagram.
myself, one TV sign on at 5 o'clock in the evening. That's when TV sign. That's when I was growing up. I don't know about you.
Right.
And you had one movie a week, if not, or whatever it is, so
Yeah.
that you didn't have the internet, so you were not bombarded with
9/10 of what
lifestyles.
you have now, we didn't have it then.
Exactly. So that people are going to compare what is it that attracts them. And it's, as I've said, it's the age in which we live. What I think the church has not done well enough is to create enough content for consumption by Christians. So the same story I told you about the boys at the camp. What came across to me is that we do not have enough Christian content on the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. We don't have enough Christian content, but I can find any other kind of stuff. So if a church is going to be serious in an age like this with millennials, we need to have that kind of content. Churches now must create avenues through which you help people. Yes, you can entertain, but you challenge. Nothing is wrong with entertaining people, but you connect that with a challenge. You connect with them, because that's what entertainment. And you start there, but you don't stop there. And I think what David is saying, what I think I hear him saying, is that you can't just be entertaining, because that in
Right.
itself is not
That's what he
sufficient.
said, yes.
You
But
have to come to the place where they come to faith.
the thing is, it's like being vegetarian.
Right.
People say being vegan or being vegetarian is the way to go. But how many vegetarian restaurants you have around the place, and how do they advertise? Do they advertise? You know,
Right.
how much money goes into advertising becoming vegan? It's the
Right.
same thing with the church. You go on, you go every channel you can find. I have a
Right.
difficulty watching TV now, because
Right.
every movie I can't watch, because
Hmm.
anything that makes me tense, I
Right.
stop watching.
Okay.
So you go to Love TV.
Right.
Love TV will have a movie from 1909. Movie old,
Right.
nothing current.
Hmm.
It's not shown in 3D or what. Everything else is just so much more attractive.
Right.
So that's what David is saying. Everything is in entertainment, and that's what the
Right.
young people, because it has to either match or be better than the quality that they're getting in their hand middle.
And it is not just entertainment, but the subtle and overt ways in which they also inculcate their own biases and their own values.
Absolutely.
You can't watch any cartoon now without seeing the issues of sexuality, human sexuality, and the variations of human sexuality. You can't watch any movie without that. You can't watch
Yes.
any documentary at all. There's an issue to be politically correct, and so I think that's where, again, as I've said, content. How
Yes.
many churches are creating content that can either match or challenge some of what is happening? And of course, sometimes the resources isn't available to do that. So you take
Yeah, but,
somebody like a TD Jakes who does some of that, but not
yes,
many people do that.
you have all these mega churches. I mean, I don't understand.
But the mega churches, again, them not just. I mean, Sandra, it's a simple principle, you know. Again, it is meeting people's needs, because
Yes.
they do their surveys, they know what the issues are, and so the things connect. I mean, there's some of them that I will watch and listen to, because I'm awed by just how creative they are, because I think that's
Right.
the issue.
It is entertaining.
It's entertaining, but also there's a message, and sometimes
Yes.
you don't miss the message. What I'm disappointed with sometimes is that you tend not to have any issues of social issues or politics or so on that impact the very people who are listening. So that if you take the United States, for instance, when you were talking about the wars and so on, none of those evangelists spoke about those things,
Right.
because you may upset some people. And the truth is, I think where David is coming from, which I agree with, is that you can entertain so much now that you sanitize everything and you don't declare what God's word is. And God's
Right.
word hasn't changed. God's word still said, don't red eye your neighbor. Share stuff with those who are in need. Those things haven't changed. You may drive a big car now, but you still must look after those who are less fortunate than yourself. So I think it is how we understand the age in which we live. So that, I mean, one of the things I say to my colleagues, when I went to seminary, we never did something like sociology. I don't think anybody now can come out of seminary without doing sociology. How are you going to talk to people if you don't understand how them function and how the structures and systems of a community operate? How are you going to be a pastor in a community if you don't have a clear sense of how to do that? How are you going to be a pastor if you don't know how to talk to a camera? How are you going to do those things in this age? Because the age has changed.
Right.
And it's not going to go back to what it was because people have got a sample of it and they like it.
Right.
And some people will never go back to the physical space called the church because there's a virtual space that they can now go to. So it is how the church, in a space like this where we are killing more people than when we have a civil war, in a space like this where we are indisciplined, where we're intolerant, where we just do the things we want to do when we want to do it, how do we connect with people rather than simply say to them, come to my space down the road because that's where you're going to find God? How do
So
I
let me
go to those spaces and help people to find God
ask
there?
you, is the church failing or is the church winning?
I think the church is in an almighty struggle for survival. Certainly in Jamaica, I would say that we're in an almighty battle to safeguard what we have gained in the past and to safeguard our relevance. I think it's an opportunity for us to rediscover what it means to be needs meeting. If we do not do that,
What? What
it
do you think?
requires us to reimagine what church is, what worship is, what witness is, what advocacy is, what fellowship is, what ministering to children and young people are. Those are the things that must become front and center of what we do, rather than say, well, we must get government to open back the church. So we are open back the church, but what impact are we having? Jesus' ministry impacted the communities where he ministered. The church must ask itself, and I'm not speaking as one against, because I have to ask my own church the same question. In what ways are we relevant to, as you say, the Generation Z and the millennials? In what ways are we relevant to the elderly? And maybe that's where we're strong, because those are the people who come mostly to our churches. In what ways are we relevant to the communities that we serve? And many churches are doing tremendous outreach programs. I think that's probably one of the strengths of the church. So to
And,
me,
and to be
it,
honest with you, Rev, I'm not so sure if the older folks are with the church now or they're just doing it out of habit,
habit,
custom.
or it's a space of fellowship. So again, it comes back to people's needs. So
Right. And,
if they
and that's what they do. Some people are
right.
just doing it out of habit.
It is a pattern, it's a tradition. This is like how we
Tradition.
do our politics, that we have two party or two term systems and we break it
Yeah.
every now and then, but it's a cycle that we go through. But again, to me, the church must come alive. And by coming alive, it is rediscovering the five things I said: how we worship, how we advocate and reach out to people, how we evangelize, how we have fellowship, and how we make disciples. That requires us to sit down with people again and ask them, well, what are your needs in a time like this? So if I come to you as my member, Sandra, what are your needs? What are your worship needs? It's a hard work. We don't want to do the hard work, but we're never going to be relevant unless we do some of that work. We have to sit down with the young people and ask them what makes sense. We have said in our own church, where we try to have this virtual camp, and the young people have said, oh, no, can go on, but we now come. And they didn't. And they didn't. And what they were saying is, listen,
Oh no,
they
they did
don't
that.
want, they didn't say it in words. They just didn't,
I
okay,
know,
so
I
again,
know, I know.
what we were trying to do is to fit them into the mold of the age. And they were saying, 10 o'clock in the morning is not our time. Maybe 2 o'clock in the morning is our time, because maybe that's when they're up. So this platform is not where we want to be either. And maybe the diet that you're offering is something that you have concocted without a conversation with us. That's why I go back to the listening. So now we are now saying, let's sit down with our young people and ask them what makes sense to you. Some churches are doing that. Some churches are really good at doing that. That's the starting place, I think, with every category of people, whether they're in the church or in a community. Now, Some pastors say, well, me not have time for do that because, all I'm about is the preaching and the teaching. But if the church is going to be relevant in 2021, those are some of the things we have to get back to. We have to get back to how we relate to people from all walks of life. And that's not the easiest thing to do, but I'm not seeing another way. We can't stand on the rooftop and shout and expect people to follow us. And we can't say there's only one way to do it and believe that we have the solution to everything. I think it is a conversation with the various sets of people, the stakeholders. How do we partner with some people to do some things? I give you an example of just a critical and creative way in which a church has operated. This COVID vaccine is here, and even before the government said that it would be free for everybody and they were going to try and do 2 million people, this church felt that, listen, in our congregation, there should be nobody who can't take the vaccine or who needs the vaccine and can't have it. So they started a fund, a simple thing like starting a fund, went outside of themselves and got support for it. So that they're saying if the vaccine will even cost, we have a way of helping people to get it. And the principle, again, out of Romans, where Paul collected an offering from the Corinthian church to help those that had a disaster, the principle is that nobody should be left behind. That's the principle that the church must embrace, that I can't say gunman for dead, or those who are wayward should just be victims of their own errors. Nobody should be left behind. If that becomes a philosophy of the church, then I'm not leaving you behind. I'm not leaving my children behind or my young people behind. But that is a lot. That's reinventing ourselves, which we don't really want to do. But trust me, if we don't do it, we're going to fossilize.
Speaking of gunman, there was a time when a gunman trying to get away from a criminal, they could run into the church. That is history.
Church bar up and grill bar and alarm system and everything.
But the gunman coming in there for them.
Well, that is true. And we've seen that at funerals. We've seen that so the respect for the institution has died. We've seen where they've broken into these sanctuaries and they've taken out the sound system, taken out the televisions and all that kind of stuff. But funny enough, I mean, if you've been around persons who are engaged in criminal activity, they still have a Bible in their pocket. Because there's a connection somehow. I was listening to a video yesterday saying the same thing. There's a connection that has not been lost.
Bible in his back pocket.
Right. And so the question is, what is the rationale or the reason for that? Is that something that was inculcated from a child and therefore you figure that maybe that is my little remnant or even the redemptive part of my life? I'm not sure. I've not done the study. And I know that there are anthropologists and so on who have done that. But maybe it is, again, it is how we connect. And I lift my hat to those who minister in the inner city communities, who have redefined what church is in those communities. And I could name some people who you know, and I'm sure you've probably interviewed them as well, who have said, we're going to be different in this space. And we're going to connect with people. And we can't always stop them from doing everything, but we're going to make an effort. And it is not just the preaching, but it's how they connect through cultural activities, how they connect through development activities, how they connect through the whole question of employment opportunities. So it's a holistic ministry that really is aimed at, again, as I've said, making the community better, making people different.
Nadine says the young people are looking for entertainment at church. Pastors have a challenge in creating authentic programs to keep them attending either in person or online. They are doing prize giveaways to draw people. To catch fish, you have to have bait then, I guess.
Right.
Oh my God, that's sad.
Well, but maybe a little bit of it is human nature. Again, what is it that Jesus said? That you have to meet a person's need. So you do what they need in order to have a relationship or a conversation with them. As I've said, I have nothing with the element of entertainment within the context of the church. If you take some of the televangelists, they have become entertainers. They're creative at what they do, but there's a message behind the entertainment. What I don't want or don't desire is entertainment without the message, because the message to me is what you're hoping to, be the bridge builder, if you like. So I invite you in through this means, whether it be entertainment, but I attempt to keep you through the message or the methodology of nurture that we say that we want to do. And we do it with our children. Every church school I know give out prizes, so that's not new.
Right.
And
But
the
I suppose
reward
whatever
is the
you do,
reinforcement.
you have to keep it moving. You have to keep it
You have to
active. You
keep
have
it moving.
correct.
Right.
You have to
But
keep
you're
it
not
correct.
going to find young people who are going to come because you ask them to come. There must be something that attracts them. So whether it is that they have a space that they call their own, or they do a program that is unique to them, or again meet their needs, that's what the challenge of being a church requires in this age. It's not the old ways are the ways of the old. And I use this example all the time. If I come into your kitchen, I would be hard pressed to find a coal stove. But I'm
Yes.
sure I'd probably find a microwave and a range, whether it be electric
Yes.
or gas. You don't take out the coal pot to boil water, you put it in the microwave.
Yes.
And if your great grandmother came back now, she wouldn't know what for dinner at the kitchen because
Yes.
it's a new age. So we
All
go with
right.
the times. So why do we feel that the church must remain with the systems 2 million years ago?
Absolutely.
I wrestle with the hard benches because I say to myself, well, maybe that was meant to keep your attention, but there are other ways in which you can keep a person's attention now, rather than ask them to sit in an uncomfortable pew.
Right.
So the design, how you design a new sanctuary, how you do those things that are creative, so that if you go into a supermarket, those who are the marketers have done the color, the location, the height, all those things. It's a science. And I'm not saying that the church must engage wholesale in a science, but if you're
Right.
going to,
We
there's a
have to
good friend of mine,
keep abreast.
you have to keep abreast with what
Yes.
are the issues for people. So that if you're
Yes.
not addressing, I mean, something like you talk about millennial singleness. When last you
Yes.
hear a sermon about singleness? We don't
Yes.
preach about that in the church. Well, let me not say that. Well, I've not heard, but maybe people listening, they have heard about that. But that's not something we deal with.
Yes.
Parenting. People have challenges doing that, especially in this time where parents don't have to become teachers at home, where the mental stress is higher and heightened. What are the ministries that we have now to help people to deal with the mental stress? It can't
Yes.
be that I said to pray. I need to have either support groups or something like that that will help people to go through this time. That is a church seeing where people are at and trying to respond to it. And I know it sounds easy. It's not easy. It's more difficult. But again, that's how we're gonna meet needs and how we're gonna build relationships and how we're gonna make a difference in the lives of people.
Yes. Well, in wrapping up, I don't want you to leave my program today without addressing how do you think the church can assist, and when you can do not much but assist in breaking the back of crime. I have to touch on that, Rev.
Well, yeah, I know, for instance, that there is a crime bill, and I know, for instance, that I mean, through the ecumenical space, there is an attempt to bring some people together to try and hold the political parties accountable and so on as a starting place that we are in support of. But
Yes.
again, I feel that many of our churches exist in the areas and communities where the crime is at a high point. And there is no doubt in my mind that many of those congregations are doing some things. We have a congregation in the Heart of One, and what they have done in collaboration with a social agency is to establish a peace center in the community, because the church is located between the two fighting factions and people don't cross it. So we say in the middle of this space, and it's a little thing, you can come from either community and you can talk to somebody if you have a challenge. We have been encouraging some of our congregations in some of those places to establish a peace wall where you can help people to come. And in these communities, they have the expressions, the artistic expression of what you can do, or a peace garden, so that there's a space where people are overwhelmed, they can come to and talk to somebody, or just be outside of the conflict and the context. Those are minuscule things. They don't achieve the macro thing. But I really believe that as church, we still have to advocate for the issues that surround our justice system, what happens in our courts, what happens in relation to how people are incarcerated, how people are defended. Those are issues for the church as well, because we can't, as I said, you have to love your neighbor as you love yourself. The intervention programs. I mean, there are some churches like my own that have ministries to people who are in prison. So that's at the back end. But then the ways in which you can intervene at the front end in terms of how we work in our schools and our institutions, but more so in our communities. I think there are opportunities for us to partner with existing institutions and churches in some of these communities that can break the back of some of those things. But it is how we then also challenge, Ms. Sandra, the system in Jamaica. It shouldn't be that I apply for a job and can't put my address because of where I live. And it shouldn't be that, you know, I am stigmatized because of where I live. I would think that, I would hope that those, but they're not gone and they're still there. And it shouldn't be that my community is targeted in a way that other communities aren't targeted. So the voice of the church needs to be heard on some of those things. So we can do the praying, yes, and we can do the preaching, yes, but the interventions at the front end and the back end and then sometime in the middle in terms of the justice system are opportunities for the church to engage. And some of those are being done, don't get me wrong, but more of it needs to be done. And the values and attitudes.
What about domestic violence? Because, you know, they're saying that there has been a surge in domestic violence, especially since COVID started. And I know a lot of people are in the church suffering silently, you know, in and out of the church. But, you know, a lot of abuse happens in the church and it doesn't really, because they don't really talk, because he's elder in the church.
Or the deacon or something.
Right. So how, is there any, what should I say now? How does the church handle, or are you seeing anything like that the church really has to handle? Because I mean, a lot of people go to church, now that people are offline. How would that be handled in a situation like that? Because an elder in the church, our sister going call to say, well, you know, brother so and so did X, Y, and Z, and how does the church manage that?
Right. Well, I think that the challenge, and in fact, we have a minister who has been involved in the creative arts, and he has just produced a video online. It's well, I won't say where it is, but it deals with the issue of domestic violence, and there'll be a series in it. But I mean, that's one little minuscule way. What I think is true is that the church is not always a safe space for people to speak about the domestic violence, and we must admit it, because the church portrays itself as a perfect space. So you come when you're good, and when all is hunky dory with you, not when you're broken.
If I was close to you and it wasn't COVID time, I'd give you a hug.
But it is true.
So true.
We are not a confessing place. So I can speak for my own church. I can't speak for nobody else. We are not open in terms of what is wrong. So that if I come to church and I have those issues, I don't feel comfortable speaking it, because next time I go hear another sermon, I'm going to hear everybody else talk about it. So I think that the challenge we have, again, is to create some spaces in terms of support groups that can be organized out with the worship space where people can come and share their stories. And it, again, one of the things that we have been talking about, even with some of my fraternal sisters and brothers, is how we can probably do that interdenominationally. So it doesn't have to be my denomination, but it could be that we agree that we have some support groups that where people can come. I know that it is not a figment of my imagination. People are abused, and the same thing with young people who are abused in their home space. And we are not unaware. We like to think that we are, but we're not unaware where they're happening. We know where they're happening. But yes. we some people tell them, oh, go pray harder. I don't buy that. But it is true. Some people say go pray about it. And I'm saying God has also given us some tools that should be intervention tools. I would never support any system in my church that allows a elder or a pastor to remain in place when there's any kind of abuse. In our church, we have a child abuse policy, which relates to I mean, it's in line with the government's regulation and so on. And any person who breaches that protocol will be dealt with because we take that seriously. And I think
I'm glad
churches need to do that in relation to domestic violence and domestic abuse and so on. So again, it comes back to the issue of how we build family life. I lift my
yeah,
hat to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I can call them name on in the public sphere because that's a core value that they declare and they live by. Not everybody, but most of them. So that you build the concept of the children being important and the family being important. And the church, maybe outside of that denomination, pays lip service to family
yeah.
life. Because again, you can recall, or maybe you can, when you were going to Sunday school, the Sunday school teacher used to come here, come look for you.
Mm-hmm.
No, nobody not gone away. We don't even know where the people them live. So that I think we need to create safe
We
spaces
have strayed from
from
what worked.
we have become institutionalized. As I said, that we center everything now around the building and that which happens within the building on a Sunday or a Saturday. And the argument is it's what happens around the people. So that if a church discerns that there are enough people who are struggling, whatever it is how you provide the support for them. So whether it be domestic violence or grieving, look at what is happening with COVID. I mean, the struggle that Jamaicans have, which is why some people have a big issue with the churches closing for the 2 or 3 weeks, is one thing when you can't go look for the person and they've died. Another thing when you can't go to the burial when they're buried. So you don't have, and Jamaicans have a connection with being with the person at the last moment and being at a
Absolutely.
funeral and being at a burial. That's why it's so hard to control. Now, the church, cuss it or quarrel with it or whatever, that safe space to come to at least relieve or release some of the tension though that is taken away. I'm not
Yes.
blaming nobody. But I'm simply saying that you have to have some support for those people. As I've said, the mental stress, the mental struggles that people are going through, we have to be cognizant of those as well within the spaces that we call the church. So it can't be that I'm a sage on a stage on a Sunday morning preaching to the world, but my members are having these issues, and there's no structure or system or program in my church that ministers to them. And I've always been moved, maybe frightened by what we have when we have what we call these healing services where we pray for people. And one of the
Yes.
things I always ask myself is, well, and I will ask people, what is it that you need to be prayed for? Or what you want the prayer to be about? And when they articulate what they want prayer for, I ask myself, well, which program in the church deals with this? Or which program in the church deals with that? Because those are their issues. So you have a church that has been established since Wapikill Philip and has been doing the same thing ad nauseum for 200 years. But the
Right.
needs of the people are not those 200-year thing anymore. As I've
Right.
said, the parenting thing. How do you raise children in this age? And how you don't children don't come with a manual, but I can have
No.
a support group in the church that guides me to do that. If I'm being abused in any way, there must be a safe space. Somebody, it could be just a person that is named in the church who don't even know the person, who you establish as an individual and you say, have you whatever, call this number. You don't even need, have a name or whatever, but at least that's a minister. And I know some churches do that. The issue of as I've said, mental illness, because we don't like to admit that we're stressed. We think there's
Big.
something wrong with it. It's a big
No.
issue.
Big issue. If you speak to the employers, which I am, they will tell you that it's
It's
a
a big
big
issue.
issue. It takes up 80% of your time.
Exactly. So you have to be counseling people at work to keep them functional
Absolutely, in order to get them to just function.
at their optimal level. So that I mean,
Absolutely.
so in a time like this, we used to say to our congregations, especially those who employed people, create a space in another place so that the parent can come and be online, so that they're not far away from the parent. Because how them leave the
Yes,
child at home and come to work if nobody's
that's
at
a
home
lot
to
of
take care of the
stress.
child? So it is, in other words, be relevant. So
Be
people come to your church
relevant.
if you're relevant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Rev, what apart from you dropped a lot of nuggets, I really, really if nothing else out of this conversation, I really appreciate your honesty,
Well,
because you really said some things that, I believe in authenticity.
right,
And I believe if you call a spade a spade. And if that is what it is, that is what it is. Now, the thing is, how do we come to a solution? How
right.
do we fix it? How do we come together as a society, as a nation, as Jamaicans? How do we come together and say, okay, this is what we're going to do to make this happen?
Right. I mean,
I
the starting point is
really,
not to be defensive. I mean, I could sit here
absolutely,
and defend everything the church does
you're not getting through, or this is not work. It's not a crime. It is
because
what it is.
the Chinese say that when there is a crisis, it is where opportunity, when, opportunity, that's a kind of crossroads where opportunity and
Right,
crisis, well, they're meeting. So to me, the
right.
crisis offers us an opportunity. And like you, my view all the time is what is the solution? You can barely talk about a problem till the
But
cows
you
come home.
tend to have a view that if you're saying that this is not working, it's a criticism. It may be a criticism, but it's a good criticism, and out of this criticism, we can come up with a solution, because the church has to be relevant. This church has to have a practical use of, so apart from spirituality.
Right,
Yes, everybody goes to church well, I know why I go to church. I go to
right,
church to remain centered. I need to fill up my tank. It's not that what the minister is saying, I don't know
right.
it. But when they reiterate it, or they remind me that this is how we're supposed to be living, this is what we're supposed to be doing, this is what we need to do as people, this is how we share, this is what we need to do to come together to help our brothers and sisters. It fill up my tank. So by next week, again, by the
You're
time
good
I'm
to go.
depleted, because you are depleted on a daily basis.
Right.
So you
So,
need that reinforcement ever so often, so that you can manage. Because
remember what I said, that if the church has a purpose, then it allows us to evaluate. If we
absolutely,
can't assess honestly, but you can, I mean, it not take nothing for ask yourself. I mean, in my own denomination, we're a denomination of about 15,000 people.
yes,
But that's a reduction to what we were 50 years ago. It was
absolutely,
more. So we could fool ourselves into thinking that we're a growing church when the numbers tell us otherwise. I
right.
know in this COVID space, we have lost some traction with our young people and our children. So what is wrong with saying that and asking us to reimagine that and redefine a program?
Because that's
What
being
what what I don't like, and I will say this because I've said it on a number of platforms, I don't like this constant appetite or consistent appetite to defend where we are and not to lose traction and not to lose gain at the risk of being relevant.
absolutely.
Because on a Sunday morning, as I've
I am
said to
with
you, I
you.
can scan YouTube and I can watch anything I want to watch. And I'm not alone. There are many people who can do that. So if I'm part of a church, I must be able to assess what is working, what is not working, what needs to happen in a healthy space. And I can't say you do it in life. You're a businesswoman. If you're selling a product that nobody now buy, you find another product
Find another product,
or
or
you
you're
change your business model.
either upgrade it, but the thing is, if you are selling a service or a product that is not working and people not interested, you ask,
Right?
what
Why?
is it that my product is not offering?
Right?
Well, in sales, you have to fix, you ask yourself, what is the problem? What problem am I solving?
Having right.
What problem am I solving with this
Hmm.
product or this
Right.
service? That is the number one question in sales. What problem am I solving? Now, if you're not solving a problem, you are irrelevant in
All
no
over the
time.
place. Right. And the
In
same
no
with the church. What
time.
problem are we solving? It's how people live, how they relate to God, how they relate to others. That's the problem we're trying to solve.
And if I'm having an issue, I can come to you if it's even to talk.
Well, that's the
You
point.
don't have to be financial
Is
help.
creating the spaces where people can feel comfortable.
Absolutely.
So we have said in our church, for instance, that our church should be a safe space for our children. No child should be molested when they come to our spaces. So we have rules that are in place, and we're not alone. Other people have done it
Right.
as well. But it's the same principle that you're talking about. we're saying the product we're selling is a safe space for the children, a safe space for the adult. We're saying we're trying to help you to become a better person in your walk in the world. And if we're not doing it, we need to ask why.
Yes.
And if I'm not reaching you, I need to understand why. So
Yes.
we say to all, we say to our pastors, but I say to them, that if you're not data driven, I don't know what you're doing, because I just don't know on what basis you're making decisions. So if you're not analyzing what is happening in your space, how many people are you reaching? You say you want to grow, where are you going to get the growth from? Where are you going to go to get the people from? If you're going to start this ministry, what are the results? The story.
Yes.
So, and people then say, oh, you're bringing a kind of, secular approach to the church. The spirit will say, Jesus did the maths. Jesus went to where people were every single time and met their needs.
I really appreciate the honesty, and many people in the chat were saying you're on point, on the money. Mr. Henry said, amen, be relevant without compromising your principles. Nadine says, I appreciate Rev's input. Thank you for being real. Which is, I really appreciate that, because when you're going to take an ostrich approach and bury hen in the sand, it's not helping anyone.
No.
So with that, I want to say thank you, Reverend Norbert Stevens, for joining me tonight. It was really a spirited conversation. I would talk to you all evening, because I really like where your headspace is at. And Major Kitson did tell me that I would love you just like I love him. So one of these days you still preach?
Now and then, yes, but not as, my children say that I have meetings. That's what I do. but I do, once a month or so, I might be in a.
So where can we hear you? Are you online? Where are you online? Where can we find you?
I go to Webster Memorial, which is a church I pastored for a while. My pastor is Reverend Astor Carlisle, brilliant preacher. But again, all across the United Church, I will go to places, and I get invited to other spaces. But now and then I will go and try.
So you don't have a page that we can follow at where you drop sermons?
I'm on Twitter, but no, the sermon will be YouTube. But again,
okay,
Sandra, why are you harassing me?
I just want people to be able to find you, because I'm sure just like me, we like your honesty. So I can only imagine what your sermons are like.
Well, if you go on YouTube, you'll find a couple of them. So you can go and search. Huh? I grew up in a family that taught me to be real, and to be honest, and to be open, and I think faith is that too. If we are serious about, because you see, you know what the antithesis of what you're saying is, that a Christian is fake, and I'm not.
Well, a lot give you a picture of what they
facade.
think. A facade of what they think you want to hear and want to see, and I'm not for that.
And my argument is, if I'm going to convince you about my faith, then I must be the same as I'm on your program, or in the pulpit, or in the boardroom, or in my car. And that's the hard part. I tell you, that's my confession. That's the hardest place, because you know that you're your true self when you drive.
Absolutely.
Your true self comes out. So whatever you do when you drive, that's who you really are. Everything else is a facade.
I must remember that.
Right. So that I'm saying, it is not for sure or to get a connection with you, but it's the authenticity of being who you are, that I can say I'm good at this, but I'm not so good at that.
More to that, I find, especially
so that I can have a conversation with you, because I am not pretending as if, all we need to do is A, B, C, D, and E, and everything will be fixed. I don't have an answer for crime and violence. I don't have an answer for the indiscipline that we have in the society, because I don't think that we lack the capacity to be disciplined. We can do it. It's just that we don't feel that we need to do it in the context in which we find ourselves. I don't have a problem for the waywardness in terms of some of our young people because of the context in which they live. But I can't sit down and say, well, oh, that's not my trouble or not my problem, because that's irresponsible. And I think
Yes.
that God has asked us to be salt and light. So if you're salt, you're salt, and you're not salt, you can't be something other than salt. You can't be
Yes.
anything other than light. So I'd rather you say to me, Sandra or Norbert, you know, you've been a fool, than to say, oh, I like what you're saying.
Right.
There's a little story, and I want to close with this. Of she's Dutch. She came to Jamaica to work with the United Church, and she said that one of the things she likes about Jamaican people is how honest we are. She said that there's a little sweet licorice, some taste bad like none. So that when you give it to some cultures, oh, this is sweet. When you give it to Jamaica, Lord, this tastes bad. And she says she prefers a Lord, this tastes bad, than you pretending that the thing is what it is not. I'm not
Yes.
casting any aspersions on a soul, because
Right.
everybody has to make their own decisions. But what I'm saying is that if the church is going to be relevant in 2021, it must be authentic, it must relate, and it must connect. If it don't do any of those things, it is just going to waste away. So that to me, we must cease being monuments and become a movement again. Church is not 9 o'clock in the morning, or
Nope.
not at Webster or Sackstop. It is not in the pulpit. It is not the person. It's not the program. It is God in us and through us. And if we believe that, then we can live different.
Amen to that.
Right.
Thank you so much for that. And with that, we say good night to another riveting Boss Lady Live. Like every other Monday night, I am so grateful, Reverend. I know you're busy and you gave me some of your Monday night, and I'm really appreciative. And I thank you for all your gems. And I'm sure people will be watching it over and over and over again to
My church
listen.
don't fire me. But these are my views, not necessarily the views of the United Church.
I will back you. So good
Thank you
night.
so much for having me, Sandra. It's been a pleasure.
You are so welcome.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
friends, for joining us again, once again on Boss Lady Live. We see you next week, same place, same time. And we give thanks to God, and we say, have a wonderful week. See you next week, Monday.
Bless you.
Good night.
Thank you. Bless you. We'll talk.
Okay, Rev.
All right. Bye-bye.